The lobby of Meridian Capital Partners occupied the entire ground floor of a 40-story glass tower on the edge of Midtown. And everything inside it had been chosen to say the same thing. You do not belong here unless you were invited. The marble was Italian. The lighting was indirect and amber-toned, the kind of warmth that cost more to engineer than most people earned in a month. The receptionist wore a dark blazer and spoke in the measured, vowel-smoothed cadence of someone trained to be pleasant and impenetrable simultaneously. Daniel Whitfield sat in one of the low, cream-upholstered chairs along the east wall, and he did not belong here. He knew it. The two men in tailored suits across the room knew it. The receptionist had figured it out approximately 4 seconds after he gave his name. He was wearing his good shirt, the light blue Oxford he saved for interviews and court dates, but even pressed and tucked, it announced itself as the kind of shirt a man ironed himself at 6 a.m. before making school lunches. Beside him, his daughter Lily sat with her legs dangling, her sneakers not quite reaching the floor. She was 6 years old and she was drawing. She had been drawing since they arrived. Her small face tilted down over a yellow legal pad. A stubby pencil, moving in the slow, deliberate strokes of someone who was not rushed by anything. She was drawing the building. Daniel glanced at the pad. She had the proportions wrong, the upper floors too wide, the base too narrow. But she had captured something true about the place. The rows of identical windows, the way the glass reflected back a distorted version of everything outside. You left out the door, he said quietly. She studied her drawing without looking up. It doesn't have one, she said. He didn't argue. The elevator opened, and a man in his 40s stepped out, mid-conversation with someone on his phone. He paused, scanned the waiting area, and his gaze moved across Daniel the way eyes move across furniture, registering the presence without acknowledging the person. Then he spotted the two suited men, redirected himself, and crossed toward them with an extended hand and a large smile. Daniel watched this without expression. He had been a systems architect for 11 years. He had sat in rooms like this before, on the other side of the equation. He understood the grammar of these spaces, what the furniture communicated, what the lighting was designed to do to a person's posture, how the slight delay in offering a seat was a message in itself. He understood it the way a man understands a language he once spoke fluently and now heard only in passing. He had not come here to compete. He had submitted a proposal for a data infrastructure consultation contract, a 6-month engagement, modest scope, specifically tailored to the gap he had identified in Meridian's publicly available architecture documentation. It was good work. He knew it was good work. Whether that mattered in a room that had already decided what it thought of his shirt was a separate question. The receptionist approached. "Mr. Whitfield? Miss Carter will see you now." He stood, tucked the legal pad under his arm, and looked at Lily. "Come on, Bug." She slid off the chair and took his hand without breaking the grip on her pencil. The conference room on the 22nd floor had a long glass table, 6 chairs, and a view of the city that a painter could have lived on for years. Standing at the far end, reviewing something on a tablet, was a woman who did not look up when they entered. Evelyn Carter was 32 years old and had been CEO of Meridian Capital Partners for 14 months, which made her either remarkable or the beneficiary of her father's surname, depending on who you asked. She was tall, dressed in a structured charcoal jacket. Her dark hair pulled back with the kind of precision that either happened naturally or took 20 minutes. When she finally set down the tablet and looked at Daniel, her expression gave nothing away. Her eyes dropped to Lily for exactly half a second, then back to Daniel. "Mr. Whitfield, Miss Carter." She gestured to the chairs. He sat. Lily climbed up beside him and opened the legal pad again without being asked. A man Daniel hadn't noticed was standing near the window, shorter, slightly soft around the jaw, wearing the expression of someone who had already made a decision and was waiting for the meeting to confirm it. He was introduced as Preston Hollis, Deputy Director of Operations. Preston picked up a thin folder from the table. Daniel recognized it as his proposal. "We've reviewed your submission," Preston said. He said it in the tone of a man about to explain something obvious to someone who should already know it. "You're proposing a full infrastructure audit and realignment of our data pipeline architecture." "Yes," Your most recent listed engagement was he flipped a page 3 years ago. A logistics firm in New Jersey. That's correct. And before that, you were independently contracted for about 8 months. Also correct. Preston set the folder down with the careful placement of someone making a point. Mr. Whitfield, our current infrastructure is handling over $4 billion in daily transaction flow. The firms we typically engage for this level of work have teams of 30 or more. You're a single contractor. I'm aware of the scope. Then you understand why this conversation is. Preston. Evelyn's voice was not loud. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to be. Preston stopped. She was looking at Daniel. Not at the folder. Not at the proposal. At him. It was the first time she had looked at him directly, and something in the quality of her attention was different from Preston's, not warmer, exactly, but more precise. Like she was measuring something that Preston hadn't thought to measure. Page 12, she said. Your note about the redundancy structure. Walk me through the reasoning. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he opened his own copy of the proposal. In the chair beside him, Lily drew. 20 minutes later, the meeting was still going. Preston had stopped interrupting. This was not because he had changed his mind about Daniel Whitfield. It was because each time he raised an objection, Daniel answered it quietly, specifically, without flourish, and the answer was correct, and Preston had enough professional self-preservation instinct to stop testing a theory that kept being disproven. Evelyn asked most of the questions. She asked them the way people ask questions when they are genuinely trying to understand something, not performing interest. When Daniel finished explaining the cascade failure pattern he had identified in Meridian's API integration layer, she was quiet for a moment. How did you find that? She asked. Your Q3 infrastructure report is on your investor relations page. The latency numbers in Table 4 don't match the architecture described in Section 2. One of them is wrong. Either the latency is wrong, which would mean someone falsified a performance metric, or the architecture description is wrong, which would mean the system is operating in a configuration your own team doesn't know about. Another silence. Which do you think it is? The architecture. She looked at him. Why? Because falsifying a latency metric for a public report is a firing offense with SEC implications. People who are willing to take that risk usually do a better job of making sure the numbers are consistent. What I think happened is that the system was patched without updating the documentation, which is almost always what happens. He paused. It's a very common failure mode in systems that were built quickly under deadline pressure. Preston was looking out the window. Evelyn tapped 2 fingers once against the table. We'd need to structure this as a limited engagement first, she said. A 30-day diagnostic. If the findings warrant continuation, that's fine. She looked at him again with that measuring quality. You don't want to negotiate scope? The scope you're describing is reasonable. She studied him for one more moment. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that functioned as a decision. Beside Daniel, Lily lifted her drawing and examined it. She had added a detail to the building, a single window on the upper floors, open, the only one that was. Preston left first, with the posture of a man who had been sidelined and was going to have thoughts about it later. The assistant who had been waiting outside came in to collect the folders and usher things toward conclusion. Daniel stood, and Lily stood with him, the legal pad tucked under her small arm. Evelyn was still at the table, reviewing something. She did not appear to be in a hurry for them to leave. When the assistant stepped out briefly to check something, Evelyn looked up. She looked at Daniel for a moment, with an expression that had changed slightly, not softer, but more careful. Like someone deciding how much of a thought to say aloud. Then she said it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform it. She said it quietly, calmly, as if she were mentioning a fact she had simply decided to share. My father knows your name. The room was not loud. The building outside hummed quietly with the business of 40 stories. Daniel didn't look up immediately. He looked down at Lily's hand, which had found his, and was holding it with the particular pressure she used when she sensed something in the air around him that she couldn't name yet. The pencil was still in her other hand. Then he looked at Evelyn Carter, and he smiled. It was a very small smile, not warm, Not cold. Not bitter. Just a slight shift in the corners of his mouth. The expression of a man receiving information he had long ago made his peace with. "Is that right?" he said. It was not quite a question. Evelyn waited. Daniel looked at her steadily. Does he remember what he did? She did not sleep well that night. This was not unusual. Evelyn Carter had not slept well most nights for the last 3 years, though the reasons had shifted. In the beginning, it was the weight of the job, the granularity of the decisions, the speed at which $4 billion moved daily through systems she was responsible for. Then it was the awareness that some of what she had inherited was less solid than it appeared. Now it was both, with the addition of a question that had arrived this afternoon in a low-lit conference room and refused to leave. Does he remember what he did? She had her assistant pull everything that could be found on Daniel Whitfield before 9 the next morning. It wasn't much. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 3 years. 2 published papers in systems architecture journals from before that. A brief mention in a trade publication from 2017, when he had been listed as lead architect on a project called the Meridian Distributed Data Framework. She read that last one twice. Meridian. Not her company, not the Meridian Capital Partners that bore her father's chosen rebranding. The original Meridian Systems Group, the infrastructure firm her father, Reginald Carter, had acquired in 2018 before folding it into what eventually became the Capital Management Division. She pulled the acquisition records. She was in a position to pull records that most people at the firm couldn't access. She had not used that access casually before, but she used it now. The Meridian Systems Group acquisition had been standard on paper. Assets transferred, intellectual property cataloged, team absorbed or released. Among the IP cataloged. A distributed data architecture framework. The core system that now, in modified form, underpinned the entire infrastructure of Meridian Capital Partners. The lead architect on that framework had not been absorbed into the company. He had been released. She kept reading. The framework had been sold to Meridian Systems Group through a subsidiary company called Whitfield Structural Analytics, LLC. The sale terms were in the acquisition record. She read them once, then read them again because she wanted to make sure she had understood them correctly. She had. The payment had been structured as a project fee, a one-time amount for deliverables completed. There were no royalties, no equity, no ongoing licensing arrangement, just a fixed payment for completed work. And then the work was no longer his. The payment was fair, technically. It was less than Daniel Whitfield would have asked for, probably. But it was within a range that could be defended if someone chose to defend it. What was not in the record was what happened afterward. She had to go further for that. What she found, in the threads and documentation she was not supposed to be able to access but could because she was who she was a pattern she recognized. Not because she had been present for it, because she had seen it from her father's side, abstracted, the way a child learns a language they can't yet read. When the acquisition was completed, the framework had been presented internally as a proprietary development, a breakthrough achievement by the new Meridian Systems technical team. The presentation that accompanied it, delivered at an executive briefing in 2019, did not mention Whitfield Structural Analytics. It did not mention Daniel Whitfield. It mentioned Preston Hollis. Preston, who had overseen the technical integration. Preston, who had received a promotion and a significant bonus in the same quarter the framework went live. Preston, who had been standing in that conference room this afternoon with the particular comfort of a man who had never had reason to worry about his position being scrutinized. Evelyn sat with this for a long time. Outside, the city moved in its indifferent dark. She thought about what it would mean to have built something genuinely built it. The way she had watched Daniel Whitfield talk about systems architecture, with the specific gravity of a person who has put years of real thought into something and then to have it erased. Not taken. Erased. To have your name removed from your own work. To have someone else's name put there instead. She thought about what she knew of the 3 years after the acquisition. Daniel had worked independently. Then, 14 months ago, something had happened to his wife. Evelyn found only a small note in a public record. A death notice in a New Jersey paper. Sarah Whitfield, 31 years old. Survived by her husband and daughter. There was no detail. There was only the fact. Evelyn closed her laptop. She sat in the dark for a while. She went to find him. It took her 2 days to locate an address, not because she was careless, but because Daniel Whitfield had taken a particular kind of care to be findable only through a specific professional address, a P.O. box associated with a small consulting LLC that was almost certainly operated from wherever he actually lived. She found a phone number through a contact chain, and she called it herself. Yes, this is Evelyn Carter. A pause. I know who it is. I'd like to meet. Not at the office. Another pause. She heard, in the background, the sound of a child, Lily, presumably asking something about breakfast. Hold on, Daniel said. And she heard him answer his daughter, in a tone she had not heard him use in the conference room. It was still quiet, but it was different, the quietness of something open rather than controlled. She heard, yes, Bug, cereal or eggs. She heard, eggs. Can I have them scrambled? She heard, you can always have them scrambled. Then, Miss Carter, I'd like to explain some things. I don't think you do. She was thrown for half a second. I'm sorry? I think you'd like to ask me for something, and you think explaining things is the required preamble. Which is fine. That's how this usually works. But you don't owe me an explanation, and I'd rather you didn't do it as a transaction. The precision of it stopped her. She had not been spoken to like that, not rudely, not with anger, but with that particular flat accuracy in a very long time. Then I'd like to ask you something, she said. You can ask. I need your help. They met in a coffee shop in Montclair, which was apparently where he lived, in a neighborhood of modest houses and old trees. She arrived first and sat with her coffee, and felt the strangeness of being somewhere that had not been arranged for her to arrive in. Daniel arrived at exactly the time he had said, with Lily beside him. Lily was wearing a striped shirt and had a small backpack that probably contained drawing materials. He sat down. Lily climbed into the chair beside him and unzipped the backpack. Evelyn said, "We have a problem. Tell me." She did. She laid it out as clearly and factually as she could, which was the only way she knew how to communicate things she was certain about. The latency discrepancy she had noticed after his mention of it, the investigation she had opened internally, what she had found in the system logs, a cascade failure pattern that had been building quietly for 7 months, invisible in any single report, but unmistakable when the logs were read sequentially. A flaw at the architecture level, not at the surface, not something a patch could fix. It needs to be rebuilt from the base layer, she said. Daniel was listening. He had not moved much since she started talking. His hands were around his coffee cup, and he was looking at the table. "I know," he said. She waited. He said, "I noticed it when I read your Q3 report. That's why I submitted the proposal." She studied him. "You already knew the scope of the problem before you came in." "Yes, you didn't lead with that. I submitted a proposal that accurately described what I could offer. It wasn't a negotiating position." She looked at him for a moment. "Why did you come at all? After what my father, that's not what this was about." Then what was it about? He looked up at her. For the first time she saw something in his expression that was not controlled, not anger, not grief. Just a kind of weathered clarity. "I built that system," he said. "I know it better than anyone alive. If it fails, it won't just take your company down. It'll take a significant portion of your client's capital with it. There are pension funds in that portfolio. There are university endowments. There are people who don't know their retirement is sitting on a fault line I can see from here." He paused. That's what it was about. Lily had produced a small notebook and was drawing. She had drawn what appeared to be a map. Evelyn looked at her for a moment, then back at Daniel. "I need you to take the contract." He shook his head. "Daniel, I'll help you. I'll do the work. But I won't sign a contract that gives Meridian Capital Partners proprietary rights over anything I produce in the process." He said it without heat. "You understand why?" She did. "Then what do you want?" He looked at her steadily. Transparency. Whatever I find, we document it together. Whatever the origin of the existing system is, it gets acknowledged in the internal record. Not publicly, I understand the exposure that creates, but internally, in writing, signed by you. He paused. And I work on my terms. My hours. I have a 6-year-old. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a moment as if waiting to see if that answer was real. Yes, she said again. He came in at 9 in the evening, after Lily was in bed with her aunt, his sister-in-law, who understood without needing explanation, who had been helping carry the weight of this for 14 months, with a quiet steadiness that Daniel had stopped being surprised by and started being simply grateful for. Evelyn gave him access to the core system logs. She had cleared the server room, not the main data center, which was staffed around the clock, but the secondary analysis room on the 17th floor, where the log archives were stored and where nobody came after 7 unless something was on fire. He brought a laptop and a notebook and a thermos of coffee. The first night, he said almost nothing. He sat and read logs. Thousands of them. The timestamp data going back 4 years. The error reports that had been flagged and suppressed, the integration points where two systems that had never been designed to speak to each other had been forced into contact by people who did not understand either system well enough to know what they were doing. Evelyn sat at the other end of the room the first night. She had told herself she was there in case he needed system access that required her credentials. This was true but incomplete. Around 1 in the morning, he said, "Here." She came over. He pointed to a sequence in the log 4 entries spanning 6 weeks from 18 months ago. Each one was a micro-failure. Each one had been individually suppressed, flagged as an anomaly, reviewed, and marked resolved. Taken separately, each was explicable. Taken together, they described a pattern. "This is when it started," he said. She looked at the timestamps. 18 months ago was 2 months before she had become CEO. 2 months before the company had formally become hers. Preston would have reviewed these. Yes, he marked them resolved. He marked them resolved. She straightened up. Did he know? Daniel looked at the screen for a moment. I think he knew that something was wrong. I don't think he understood what it was. The original system had a self-correcting redundancy built into the base layer, a failsafe that would have caught this pattern and flagged it for architectural review. That redundancy was removed during the integration. He paused. I'm guessing it was removed because it interfered with the way the patched version was running. Someone solved a surface problem and removed the mechanism that would have caught a deeper one. Preston, someone on his team, at minimum. She was quiet for a moment. He told me in November that the infrastructure was performing within acceptable parameters. Daniel didn't say anything. She said, he lied. He told you what the surface metrics showed. Whether he understood what was underneath them is a question you'd have to ask him. A pause. I'd recommend asking it in writing. On the 4th night, Lily came with him. Evelyn found them when she arrived at 9:30. Daniel at the workstation. Lily asleep on the small couch against the wall. Her backpack tucked under her head, the yellow legal pad open on the cushion beside her. She had been drawing before she fell asleep. The drawing showed 2 figures at a desk, one tall and one small. And outside the window of the desk, a city that looked like it was made of geometric shapes, stacked carefully on top of each other. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment. She had not been looking at Lily, exactly. She had been looking at the drawing. She came in quietly and sat at her own workstation and worked. Around midnight, Daniel stood to refill his thermos and glanced at the couch. She was insistent, he said, in a tone that conveyed both apology and the complete absence of apology. She's fine, Evelyn said. He looked at her for a moment, then went back to work. On the 9th day, Daniel found it. He had been working backward through the integration records, tracing the modifications made to the base architecture after the acquisition. He found the point where the redundancy layer had been removed. He found the documentation such as it was that had been filed at the time. He found the name attached to the modification order. He called Evelyn into the room and showed her. She read the documentation. She read it twice. Then she sat down. He signed off on removing the failsafe, she said. Not a question. Yes. The stated reason was performance optimization. The removal did improve surface performance metrics by about 12%, which is why it looked good on reports. And underneath, you took out the mechanism that would have told you when the system was developing a structural fault. He paused. It's the equivalent of removing the warning light from your dashboard because the warning light is annoying. She was quiet. How long do we have? She asked. Before a cascade failure? At current transaction volume and current fault propagation rate, he looked at his notebook, between 3 and 6 weeks. Could be sooner if transaction volume spikes. You have a quarterly close coming up. She knew the quarterly close. Highest transaction volume of the year. 2 weeks, she said. Yes. She stood up. She went to the window. The city was dark and clean and indifferent below. She said, I need to take this to the board. Yes. They'll want to know how it happened. Yes. And who was responsible. He didn't say anything. He let her sit with the weight of what that meant. Not just Preston, not just the technical failure, but the chain of decisions that had led here. Her father's acquisition, the IP that had been absorbed and repackaged, the name that had been removed. Daniel, she said. He looked up. When you walked into that conference room, you already knew all of this might be in there. You came in anyway. Yes. Why didn't you just... She stopped. She was about to say go to someone or report it, or some version of the idea that there was a cleaner, more direct path that he had chosen not to take. She stopped because she already knew the answer. Who does a man go to when the damage was done by someone with the resources to manage the story of what happened? What door does a person knock on when the institution that wronged them is the institution? He had come in through the front. He had submitted a proposal. He had sat in the chair with his daughter beside him and answered every question they asked. He had let the work speak. She turned from the window. I'm going to call a board meeting, she said. Next week. I want you there. He looked at her steadily. I'll be there, he said. The board of Meridian Capital Partners convened on a Tuesday morning in the 42nd floor boardroom. A room that communicated authority through its dimensions and its silence, and the quality of the chairs. 7 board members, 3 senior executives, and 2 outside counsel sat at a table long enough to require a microphone system for normal volume speech. Evelyn opened the meeting herself. She laid out the infrastructure situation first, the technical facts, the timeline, the risk assessment. She presented this calmly and in full, without minimizing the severity and without performing distress. She had been doing this job for 14 months, and she had learned that the people in this room respected clarity above all else. Then she brought Daniel in. He had worn a jacket. It was a good jacket, not new, but well kept. Lily was not with him. She was in school, which was where she was supposed to be on Tuesday mornings. He sat at the far end of the table, and he presented his findings. He had prepared a document 41 pages, appendices included, that laid out the fault pattern, its origin, its propagation timeline, and the remediation pathway. He spoke without notes. He answered questions directly and without visible anxiety. One of the outside counsel, a thin man named Garfield Ames, who had been in the business of financial services law for 30 years, asked, Mr. Whitfield, what is your relationship to the underlying architecture of this system? Daniel said, I designed it. Ames looked at him over his glasses. When? Between 2015 and 2017, under contract with Meridian Systems Group, and the intellectual property from that engagement was transferred to Meridian Systems Group under a work-for-hire arrangement at the time of sale. That transfer was documented and legally executed. He paused. What was not documented was my contribution to the development of the framework. When Meridian Systems Group was acquired by Reginald Carter's holding company in 2018, and when that framework was subsequently presented internally as a proprietary development of the new technical team, my name was not included in that presentation. The framework was attributed to others. Silence. Can you document that claim? Ames asked. I can. He opened a folder. I have the original design documentation, including version-controlled drafts with metadata timestamps. I have email records from the development period. I have the project specifications as originally submitted. I have a communication from 2018, 3 months after the acquisition, in which I was informed that my services would no longer be required, and that the project had been successfully internalized by the new team. He placed these on the table, neatly, one by one. I also have the internal presentation, from 2019 inches, which the framework was attributed to Preston Hollis. Preston Hollis, who was sitting 3 chairs down, had gone very still. "Where did you get that presentation?" he asked. His voice was level, but something in it had changed. "You gave it at an executive briefing on February 14th, 2019. You used a slide deck. Slide decks get distributed." Daniel looked at him without anger. "I've had that for 4 years. The session lasted 4.5 hours. Evelyn had known it would be long. She had not known that she would spend most of it watching Daniel Whitfield sit at the far end of a long table and respond to every attempt at reframing, every subtle suggestion that his documentation might be incomplete, every maneuver that the outside counsel and the flustered senior executives tried to run and simply not move. Not emotionally, not factually, not in the quality of his attention. He did not raise his voice once. He did not express bitterness or demand acknowledgement. He answered the questions he was asked, and let the documents answer the rest. At 3:15 in the afternoon, Garfield Ames removed his glasses and set them on the table. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes, in my opinion, the board needs to take a recess to discuss the implications of what's been presented here today." Both the technical implications and he chose the word carefully, historical ones. "Agreed," she said. "Mr. Whitfield, you can wait outside." Daniel stood and walked out of the room with the same unhurried quality he had walked in with. In the hallway, he sat in a chair and waited. After 20 minutes, Evelyn came out. She sat in the chair next to him. She sat there for a moment, without speaking. Then she said, "I'm sorry." He looked at the wall across the hallway. "For what part?" he asked. "For what my father did. For what Preston did. For the 2 days I spent deciding whether to take your proposal seriously. And the reasons I was using to decide." She paused. "For all of it." He was quiet. "I can't undo it," she said. "I know I can't undo it. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I needed to say it in a place where it was real. Not a settlement agreement, not a liability framework. Just." She stopped. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "It mattered," he said. "What was taken. It mattered. And it had consequences. And there's no document that changes that." He paused. "But the work is still there. The system I built is still running. It's broken right now, but it can be fixed. That matters too." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you need to fix it?" 6 weeks. Access to the base layer. A small team that I can direct. You'll have it." He nodded once. She stood to go back in, and then she stopped. "Your daughter," she said. "She drew the building on the first day. She said it didn't have a door." He looked up at her. "She notices things," he said. Evelyn looked at the wall for a moment. "I'd like to think," she said carefully, "that some things can have doors added to them later." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away, either. The fix took 7 weeks. Daniel worked with a team of 3 engineers whom he selected himself. After reviewing their documentation history for the specific quality of carefulness he was looking for, he briefed them each individually before the project began. He told them what the system was supposed to do, what it was actually doing, and what the gap between those 2 things had cost. One of the engineers, a young woman named Cassie Aldrich, who was 26, and had the same quality of specific attention that Daniel recognized as the marker of someone who actually understood what they were working on, asked him, on the second day, "Did you really build the original?" "Yes," he said. She looked at the architecture diagram on the screen for a moment. "It's good," she said, "even with everything that was done to it afterward. You can see what it was supposed to be." He didn't say anything for a moment. That's enough, he said. Preston Hollis resigned 3 weeks into the project. The board had given him a choice that was not really a choice. His resignation was announced as a mutual decision, which was the language institutions use when they need to maintain the appearance of orderly weather. Reginald Carter, Evelyn's father, called her the day after the board session. She took the call. She did not repeat what was said. It lasted 11 minutes. Afterward, she sat in her office and looked at the city for a long time, and then she called her assistant and asked her to send flowers to the address in Montclair, New Jersey, and to include a note that said nothing except, "Thank you." The flowers were for Daniel. She knew he would understand what they were really for, which was not gratitude, exactly, but acknowledgement. The kind that comes when a person finally looks directly at something they have been looking around for years. The infrastructure rebuild went live on a Thursday morning in November. There was no ceremony. There was a team of 4 people in the 17th floor analysis room, monitoring the migration metrics as the old unstable architecture was progressively replaced by the corrected version. Daniel sat at the workstation, watching the numbers. And when the final segment migrated cleanly, and the system registered green across all fault indicators for the first time in months, he wrote a single number in his notebook. He closed the notebook. Cassie Aldrich said, "That's it? That's it." "No," she gestured vaguely. "I don't know." "Champagne?" He looked at her. "It's 7:15 in the morning." "Right." She paused. "It's a really good feeling, though." "Yes," he said. "It is." It was a Saturday in late November. Clear and cold, the kind of afternoon that makes New York look like a painting of itself. Lily had a new sketchbook, a proper one, with heavier paper, which her aunt had given her for her birthday 2 weeks earlier. She was sitting on a bench in Riverside Park, working on something with focused intensity. Her tongue just slightly visible at the corner of her mouth. Daniel sat beside her with a coffee. He was not thinking about anything in particular. This was unusual enough that he noticed the specific quality of not having something to hold in his mind. The project was done. The contract had ended. He had received payment for the work, which was modest and fair, and by his own design structured to leave no ambiguity about ownership of the methodology. He had submitted the final technical documentation under his own name, and the documentation had been filed, internally, with a notation that acknowledged his authorship of the original framework. It was not public. He had not asked for it to be public. It was real. A shadow fell across the bench from the left. Lily looked up first. Evelyn Carter was standing on the path, wearing a coat he hadn't seen before. Dark, gray, long, slightly impractical for a park, which suggested she had come from somewhere else, or was going somewhere else and had detoured. "I called your number," she said. "It went to voicemail. I leave it on silent on weekends." "I know. Your sister-in-law told me where you'd be. I hope that's..." "It's fine." She looked at Lily. "Hello," she said. Lily looked at her with the steady, thoughtful gaze she used on things she was still figuring out. "Hello," Lily said. "What are you drawing?" Lily turned the sketchbook around. It was the building, the Meridian Capital Partners Tower. She had been drawing it for weeks, in various versions. This one was different from all the others. In this one, the building had a door, a real door, large and open, with light coming out of it. And outside the door, at the bottom of the building, there were 2 small figures, one tall and one small, both walking in. Evelyn looked at the drawing for a long moment. "It's beautiful," she said. Lily said, "I got the proportions right this time." Evelyn looked at Daniel. He was looking at his coffee. She sat down on the other end of the bench, not close, but not far. The appropriate distance of 2 people who did not yet know what to call what they were to each other, and had decided not to force a name on it. "The board approved the new transparency framework yesterday," she said. "I saw. Every major infrastructure contributor going forward will be credited in the architecture documentation, internally and externally." "That's good. It won't fix what happened before." "No." She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the nearly bare trees. "I'm also looking at the historical IP attribution for the existing system. There are legal and financial dimensions to it that are complicated. My father's attorneys have opinions. I imagine they do. What I want you to know is that I'm not going to let the complicated part be a reason to do nothing." He looked at her then. She was looking at the river, which was gray and bright in the November light. "I know," he said. She looked back at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Lily, between them and slightly closer to her father, was drawing again. She had added a detail to the two figures outside the building. A third figure, smaller, walking just slightly ahead of both of them. The afternoon was cold and clear. The city made its usual sound, which was every sound at once, and therefore no particular sound. Daniel finished his coffee and didn't ask Evelyn to leave, which was its own kind of thing. She didn't leave. The three of them sat in the park while the light moved and Lily drew, and whatever was beginning cautious and unhurried, the way real things begin was left to take its own time.